Long before nutrition labels, protein powders, and shelves packed with expensive supplements, people understood something that modern life has nearly forgotten. Healing was not always found in a bottle. Strength was not purchased in a container. Sometimes it came from a fire burning quietly through the evening, a clay pot resting above glowing coals, and a meal prepared slowly enough for nature to reveal its gifts. Across the hills and valleys of the ancient biblical world, food carried a meaning deeper than simple nourishment. Meals represented gratitude, hospitality, survival, and faith. Families gathered around humble ingredients and transformed them into something remarkable through patience. Every herb had a purpose. Every seed carried a story. Every recipe was connected to generations of observation and wisdom passed from parent to child. Today, we are taking a journey back into that forgotten world. We will walk through landscapes once traveled by shepherds, prophets, fishermen, kings, and ordinary families whose names history never recorded. Along the way, we will discover foods inspired by biblical traditions and ancient practices that helped sustain people through famine, war, hardship, and long years of labor. But before we explore the recipes themselves, there is one important truth to understand. The people of the ancient world did not separate food from health. They viewed the two as inseparable. What they placed on the table was often the same thing they relied upon when someone was weak, exhausted, recovering, or aging. The kitchen was not only a place of preparation, it was also a place of restoration. Among all the foods that appeared repeatedly throughout biblical history, few were as respected as a carefully prepared broth. It required time. It demanded attention. It could not be rushed. Hours passed as water slowly drew nutrients from bones, herbs, vegetables, and spices. The result was far more than flavored liquid. It became a concentrated source of nourishment that could be shared with travelers, elders, children, and honored guests. Our story begins more than 3,000 years ago during one of the most difficult periods in Israel's history. The nation was suffering under constant oppression. Harvests were threatened. Villages lived in fear. Many people hid what little food they possessed because invading forces frequently swept through the land, taking anything valuable. In the middle of this uncertainty lived a man named Gideon. At first glance, Gideon appeared ordinary. He was not a king. He was not a famous warrior. He was simply trying to survive. Yet his life would eventually become one of the most remarkable stories in the Bible. One day, while working in secret, Gideon encountered a visitor unlike any he had ever met. Sensing the importance of the moment, he immediately did something that reveals a great deal about ancient culture. He prepared food. This was not a casual decision. In biblical times, offering a meal represented honor, respect, and generosity. The quality of the meal reflected the value placed upon the guest. When Gideon wanted to show the highest level of hospitality available to him, he chose ingredients that required effort and patience. Among those preparations was a rich broth made from goat. To modern readers, that detail may seem insignificant. Yet for the people of that era, it carried tremendous meaning. Goats were central to daily life throughout the region. Families depended on them for milk, fiber, and meat. Every part of the animal was valued because resources could not be wasted. When a goat was prepared for food, the bones were often saved and simmered for long periods. Cartilage, marrow, connective tissue, and minerals slowly entered the cooking liquid, creating a broth prized for both flavor and nourishment. The longer it cooked, the richer it became. Imagine standing beside a fire in ancient Israel as evening approaches. The air carries the scent of dry earth and wild herbs. Nearby, a clay vessel rests above glowing embers. Inside, goat bones gently release their essence into clear water. Garlic softens, onion sweetens. Fragrant herbs drift through the steam. Nothing is hurried. Nothing is forced. Hour after hour, the transformation continues. What emerges is a golden broth with remarkable depth. Every ingredient contributes something unique. The bones provide gelatin and natural collagen compounds. Garlic offers aromatic sulfur compounds long appreciated throughout the ancient world. Herbs contribute flavor and beneficial plant compounds. Together, they create a food far greater than the sum of its parts. For Gideon, this broth was more than nourishment. It was an expression of care. It communicated welcome without speaking a word. It represented the willingness to invest time and resources on behalf of another person. That lesson remains surprisingly relevant today. Modern culture often celebrates speed. Meals are rushed. Conversations are shortened. Convenience frequently replaces craftsmanship. Yet ancient broth reminds us that some of life's greatest benefits appear only when we slow down enough to allow them to develop naturally. The people who prepared these recipes may not have understood modern scientific terminology, but they understood observation. They recognized patterns. They noticed which foods seemed to support strength, comfort, and recovery. Over generations, those observations became traditions preserved through daily practice. And that is where our journey truly begins. Not with a miracle ingredient or a secret formula, but with a simple pot, a patient fire, and a timeless recipe that carried one man's act of hospitality into history. The story of ancient healing foods does not end with Gideon's pot simmering beside a quiet fire. In many ways, it is only the beginning. Across the centuries that followed, the people of the biblical world continued relying on simple ingredients, patient preparation, and traditions passed carefully from one generation to the next. Their lives were not easy. Most families worked from sunrise until darkness. They planted crops by hand, carried water from wells, tended animals, and endured seasons of drought, uncertainty, and hardship. Yet despite these challenges, they developed a remarkable understanding of how food could support the body through every stage of life. They did not possess laboratories or modern nutrition textbooks, but they possessed something equally valuable: thousands of observations gathered over generations. They watched which foods helped exhausted workers recover after long days in the fields. They noticed what nourished children during periods of rapid growth. They learned what comforted the elderly when strength began to fade. These lessons became part of daily life, woven into recipes that survived because they worked. Among the most respected ingredients in this ancient tradition was a small aromatic plant that appears repeatedly throughout Scripture. It was not famous because of its beauty. It did not produce large fruit or dramatic flowers. In fact, many travelers might have walked past it without giving it a second glance. Yet the people of Israel knew this herb well. It grew among rocky hillsides, clung to stone walls, and released a distinctive fragrance when touched. Its scent was sharp, earthy, and cleansing. Over time, it became associated with some of the most meaningful moments in biblical history. This plant was hyssop. Whenever hyssop appears in Scripture, it often accompanies moments of renewal, purification, or restoration. During the first Passover in Egypt, families used bundles of hyssop as part of the instructions they received before their deliverance. Centuries later, the herb continued to appear in ceremonial practices connected with cleansing and restoration. Its repeated presence reveals how deeply it was respected within the culture of the ancient Near East. To the people who lived during those times, hyssop represented far more than a culinary herb. It symbolized fresh beginnings, healing, and the hope of being made whole again. Imagine an ordinary evening in Jerusalem nearly 2,000 years ago. The crowded streets are gradually becoming quieter as families return home. Merchants close their stalls. Oil lamps begin glowing behind windows. In one modest house, a woman prepares the evening meal. The kitchen is simple by modern standards. A clay pot rests above a small fire. Nearby sits a bundle of freshly gathered herbs, including fragrant hyssop. Beside them lies a small bird, one of the most affordable sources of nourishment available to ordinary families. Wealthier households might prepare larger meals, but many people depended on simpler ingredients that could stretch limited resources while still providing valuable nourishment. The woman fills her pot with water and places it over the flame. As the temperature slowly rises, she adds the bird, allowing the bones and connective tissues to release their goodness into the liquid. Garlic follows. A small onion is added next. Finally, she ties together several stems of hyssop and lowers them gently into the simmering broth. Almost immediately, the aroma begins to change. The kitchen fills with an herbal fragrance unlike anything else. It is fresh yet warming, sharp yet comforting. The steam drifts upward and fills the room with a scent that generations before her would have recognized instantly. Unlike heavier broths prepared from larger animals, this recipe requires less time. Smaller bones surrender their nutrients more quickly, creating a lighter broth that remains surprisingly rich in flavor. As the hours pass, the liquid gradually develops a golden clarity. The ingredients blend together without competing for attention. Nothing dominates. Everything contributes. The result is balanced, gentle, and satisfying. For the families who prepared meals like this, broth served purposes extending far beyond hunger. It offered comfort after difficult days. It provided warmth during cold evenings. It became a source of strength during recovery from illness or exhaustion. Parents gave it to children. Caregivers offered it to elders. Travelers appreciated it after long journeys across dusty roads. Its value came not only from what it contained, but also from the care invested in creating it. Modern science continues discovering compounds within traditional herbs that may help explain why ancient cultures valued them so highly. Researchers studying aromatic plants have identified numerous naturally occurring substances that interact with the human body in fascinating ways. While biblical families could not describe these compounds using scientific terminology, they recognized their effects through experience. Over generations, practical observation often led people toward habits that supported well-being long before anyone understood the biological mechanisms involved. Yet perhaps the most important lesson hidden within these ancient recipes has little to do with chemistry and everything to do with perspective. The people who prepared these meals understood something that modern society frequently overlooks. Healing rarely happens instantly. Growth requires time. Recovery cannot be rushed. Just as broth develops slowly through hours of gentle simmering, many of the most meaningful improvements in life occur gradually. Strength returns one day at a time. Wisdom develops one lesson at a time. Relationships deepen one conversation at a time. The humble pot on the fire became a reminder of this truth. Every stage of preparation required patience. Every ingredient contributed its own character. Every hour added depth that could not be achieved through haste. In a world obsessed with speed and efficiency, the ancient practice of making broth offers a quiet invitation to embrace a different rhythm. It encourages us to slow down long enough to appreciate processes that unfold naturally. As the aroma of hyssop rises from the steaming pot and fills the room, we begin to understand why traditions like these endured for centuries. They were not merely recipes. They were expressions of care, patience, and accumulated wisdom. They connected families to their ancestors and reminded communities that even simple ingredients could become extraordinary when treated with respect. And while the centuries have changed nearly everything about daily life, the lessons hidden within those ancient kitchens continue speaking to us today, inviting us to rediscover the value of slowing down, paying attention, and allowing time to work its quiet transformation. There are certain images in the Bible that seem almost ordinary at first glance. A clay pot resting above a fire, water beginning to steam, bones gently simmering beneath the surface. To modern readers, these details may appear insignificant compared to dramatic miracles, powerful kings, and prophetic visions. Yet for the people who originally heard these stories, such images carried immediate meaning. They recognized them because they reflected everyday life. They understood what happened when bones remained in water for hours. They knew the aroma that filled a home when herbs met rising steam. They understood the comfort that waited at the end of a long day when a warm bowl was placed into tired hands. This familiarity is what makes one particular image from the book of Ezekiel so fascinating. Ezekiel lived during one of the darkest chapters in Israel's history. The nation faced invasion, destruction, and exile. Families were separated from their homes. Cities that once thrived were reduced to ruins. Everything familiar seemed to be disappearing. In the middle of this turmoil, Ezekiel received visions and messages that challenged, warned, and encouraged the people around him. Many of those messages contained symbolic imagery designed to communicate deep truths through everyday experiences. One such image involved a pot set over a fire with water and bones placed inside. To us, it may seem like a simple cooking scene. To the people of Ezekiel's generation, it represented something immediately recognizable. They had seen similar pots countless times. They knew how broth was made. They understood the patience required and the transformation that occurred while the fire slowly worked beneath the vessel. The image connected spiritual lessons with practical reality in a way everyone could understand. Imagine a small household during the years of exile. Outside, uncertainty dominates daily life. News arrives slowly. The future remains unclear. Yet inside the home, familiar routines continue. Someone gathers fuel for the fire. Someone fetches water. Someone prepares ingredients for the evening meal. Despite political upheaval and personal hardship, families still need to eat. Children still become hungry. Elders still require care. Daily life moves forward one meal at a time. In such a household, lamb often served as a valuable source of nourishment. Sheep played a central role throughout the biblical world. Their wool provided clothing. Their milk supplied food. Their meat offered sustenance during important meals and celebrations. When an animal was prepared, families used as much of it as possible. Bones were never considered worthless leftovers. Instead, they became the foundation of another meal. The preparation began long before the broth itself. Bones were often roasted first, allowing their flavor to deepen and develop complexity. Once browned, they were transferred into a pot and covered with water. The fire beneath remained gentle. This was not a process meant for rushing. Strong boiling could cloud the liquid and diminish the final result. Patience remained essential from beginning to end. As the hours passed, ingredients gradually released what they contained. Marrow softened. Cartilage broke down. Minerals entered the liquid. The broth slowly changed in color, texture, and aroma. Garlic contributed warmth. Onion added sweetness. Herbs introduced subtle layers of fragrance. Nothing happened quickly, yet everything happened continuously. Transformation unfolded one moment at a time. The people who prepared such meals may never have spoken about collagen, amino acids, or nutritional science, but they recognized outcomes. They noticed how certain foods supported recovery after illness. They observed that some meals seemed easier to digest than others. They paid attention when elders requested particular dishes, or when weary workers felt renewed after eating specific foods. Over generations, these observations accumulated into practical knowledge passed from parents to children. For many households, broth became associated with restoration. Someone recovering from sickness might receive a warm bowl because it required little effort to consume while still providing nourishment. An older family member struggling with appetite might find comfort in its gentle flavor. Travelers returning from long journeys often appreciated its warmth after days of fatigue. Mothers preparing meals for children recognized its ability to satisfy without overwhelming delicate stomachs. This role as a restorative food explains why broth maintained such importance throughout history. It was versatile. It adapted to available ingredients. Most importantly, it transformed humble resources into something deeply nourishing. Picture an elderly shepherd returning home after spending years tending flocks across rugged hills. His hands show the effects of decades spent working outdoors. His pace is slower than it once was. As evening arrives, a bowl of slowly prepared broth waits beside the fire. Steam rises gently into the cool air. He lifts the bowl, pauses for a moment, and takes the first sip. Warmth spreads through his body. The meal is simple, yet it delivers exactly what he needs. Scenes like this unfolded countless times across centuries of biblical history. What makes them remarkable is not extravagance, but consistency. These traditions endured because they fit naturally into everyday life. Families did not prepare broth to follow trends or pursue novelty. They prepared it because experience taught them its value. Each generation inherited both the recipe and the wisdom behind it. Modern life often encourages us to seek dramatic solutions. We are drawn toward quick results, instant transformations, and promises of immediate improvement. Ancient practices tell a different story. They remind us that lasting benefits frequently emerge through patience and repetition. Just as broth develops through hours of slow simmering, many forms of growth occur gradually. Strength returns gradually. Healing progresses gradually. Wisdom accumulates gradually. Relationships deepen gradually. The process may appear slow, but that does not make it ineffective. In fact, some of the most profound transformations happen precisely because they are allowed to unfold at their natural pace. This lesson echoes through the imagery found in Ezekiel's world. A pot over a fire may seem ordinary, yet it illustrates an enduring truth. Valuable things often require time. They cannot be forced. They cannot be rushed. The ingredients must remain together long enough for something new to emerge. As the broth continues simmering and evening settles across the landscape, another story begins taking shape. This next chapter does not unfold in a quiet household or among exiles seeking comfort. Instead, it emerges from the rugged life of soldiers, travelers, and men pushed to the limits of endurance. Their challenges were different, but their need for nourishment remained the same. And once again, a humble pot of broth would play a surprisingly important role in helping them find the strength to continue forward. The ancient world could be unforgiving. Long before paved roads connected cities and modern transportation shortened distances, every journey demanded endurance. Travelers crossed rocky valleys beneath scorching sunlight. Shepherds followed their flocks across rough hillsides for days at a time. Farmers worked from dawn until darkness, battling heat, dust, and exhaustion. Soldiers marched across difficult terrain carrying weapons, supplies, and the weight of uncertainty. Life required strength, and strength required nourishment. Among the many leaders whose stories fill the pages of Scripture, few understood hardship better than David. Before he became king, he spent years living as a fugitive, sleeping outdoors, moving from place to place, and depending upon the loyalty of a small group of companions. These men endured hunger, danger, and constant movement. They crossed wilderness regions where food was limited and comfort was almost non-existent. Yet they remained together, bound by trust and shared struggle. Imagine one of those evenings after a long day on the move. The sun has disappeared behind distant hills. The air grows cooler. Men who have spent hours walking finally stop to rest. Their feet ache. Their muscles feel heavy. Every step of the day remains stored in their bodies. Some gather firewood. Others fill water skins from a nearby source. A few begin preparing the evening meal. No elaborate feast awaits them. There are no luxurious ingredients or carefully decorated tables. There is only practicality. There is only the understanding that tomorrow will require strength once again. And so the fire is lit. A large pot is placed above the flames. Bones from sheep or goats are lowered into water. Garlic is crushed and added. Wild herbs gathered during the journey are tossed into the simmering liquid. The process begins. To an outsider, it might seem like an ordinary meal. To the men gathered around that fire, it is something far more important. It is recovery. It is preparation. It is reassurance that despite uncertainty, they will have the nourishment needed to continue. Ancient military camps throughout the world relied upon similar practices. Long before modern nutritional science existed, experienced leaders understood a simple reality. Exhausted people perform poorly. Hungry people lose focus. Weakened bodies struggle to endure prolonged challenges. Food was not merely a reward at the end of the day. It was a necessity that influenced survival itself. Broth became especially valuable because it transformed limited resources into a meal capable of serving many people. Bones that might otherwise be discarded still contained valuable nourishment. Herbs growing naturally across the landscape contributed flavor and character. Water carried everything together into a form that was easy to consume and deeply satisfying. As the hours passed, conversation slowly returned to the camp. The first hunger faded. Tension eased. Laughter occasionally emerged. For a brief moment, weary travelers felt human again. This emotional aspect of food is often overlooked when discussing ancient diets. Meals did more than nourish muscles and bones. They created moments of connection. They provided opportunities for rest. They reminded people that they were not facing hardship alone. Imagine David sitting beside the fire surrounded by loyal companions. Some are former shepherds. Others once worked as farmers. A few may have backgrounds very different from his own. Yet around the simmering pot, those differences matter less. Everyone shares the same meal. Everyone experiences the same warmth. Everyone gains the same opportunity to recover before tomorrow's challenges arrive. There is something profoundly human about that image. Across thousands of years, despite enormous technological changes, people still gather around food for similar reasons. Families share meals after difficult days. Friends meet over dinner to reconnect. Communities celebrate important occasions with food at the center. The details may differ, but the underlying purpose remains remarkably consistent. Food creates connection. Food creates comfort. Food creates continuity during uncertain times. The broth prepared in camps throughout the biblical world embodied all of these qualities. It required little complexity, yet offered substantial value. It adapted easily to available ingredients. Most importantly, it reminded people that recovery was possible. Ancient cultures understood the importance of rhythm. Work was followed by rest. Effort was followed by renewal. Expenditure of energy required replenishment. Modern life often disrupts these natural cycles. Many people push through exhaustion without allowing adequate recovery. Meals are skipped. Sleep is sacrificed. Constant productivity becomes the goal. Yet the wisdom hidden within ancient traditions suggests a different approach. Even the strongest warriors needed rest. Even the most determined travelers needed nourishment. Even great leaders required moments of recovery. David's story demonstrates this repeatedly. Despite extraordinary courage and resilience, he remained human. He experienced fear, fatigue, disappointment, and physical limitation. The people around him experienced the same realities. Their strength did not come from ignoring these needs. It came from recognizing them and responding appropriately. The simmering pot in the camp represented that response. It acknowledged exhaustion without shame. It provided nourishment without extravagance. It created space for restoration before the next challenge arrived. As night deepened and stars filled the sky, the broth continued releasing its aroma into the cool air. Men who had spent the day focused on survival now allowed themselves to relax. The fire crackled softly. Conversation drifted between groups. Bowls were refilled. Muscles gradually loosened. Tomorrow would bring new obstacles, new distances, new uncertainties. But for this moment, they were fed. For this moment, they were restored. For this moment, strength was quietly returning. Perhaps that is one reason traditions like these survived for centuries. They addressed needs that transcend time and culture. Every generation experiences fatigue. Every generation faces challenges. Every generation benefits from practices that support recovery and resilience. The ancient soldiers who gathered around those fires may never have imagined people thousands of years later discussing their meals. Yet the principles reflected in their routines remain surprisingly relevant. Nourishment matters. Rest matters. Community matters. Patience matters. And as we continue exploring the foods inspired by biblical traditions, another story awaits us. This next chapter shifts away from military camps and rugged journeys. Instead, it leads us toward a prophet whose life became closely associated with restoration, compassion, and the possibility of healing when circumstances seemed hopeless. In his world, food was not merely fuel for endurance. It became part of a larger story about renewal, recovery, and the remarkable ability of simple ingredients to help people find their way back to strength once again. Among all the prophets whose stories appear in Scripture, few are remembered as vividly as Elisha. His life unfolded during a period when ordinary people faced constant uncertainty. Harvests could fail without warning. Drought could arrive unexpectedly. Travel was dangerous, resources were limited, and medical knowledge was primitive compared to modern standards. Yet despite these challenges, people still searched for healing, comfort, and hope. They looked for ways to recover from illness, regain strength after hardship, and care for loved ones when weakness entered the home. In that world, food often became one of the first tools used in the process of restoration. One of the most intriguing stories connected to Elisha involves a group of men preparing a meal during a difficult season. Food was scarce, and they gathered what they could find from the surrounding countryside. At first, everything seemed normal. Ingredients were collected, the cooking pot was placed over the fire, and the meal began to take shape. Yet something unexpected happened. One of the gathered plants proved unsuitable, turning the contents of the pot bitter and unsafe. Alarm spread quickly among those waiting to eat. What should have provided nourishment had become a source of concern. The story is remembered because of what happened next. Elisha intervened, and what seemed ruined was restored. The meal that had caused fear became safe once again. Beyond its spiritual significance, the account reveals something important about daily life in the ancient world. People relied heavily on simple foods prepared from local ingredients. Every meal mattered. Every pot on the fire represented effort, hope, and necessity. Imagine a small community living in the hills of ancient Israel. The landscape stretches beneath a bright sky. Olive trees the hillsides. Dust rises from narrow pathways connecting homes and fields. Families work throughout the day gathering resources, tending animals, and preparing food. Life is demanding, but it continues through routines refined over generations. As evening approaches, someone begins preparing a restorative broth. Unlike the hearty camp broths favored by travelers and soldiers, this version is gentler. It is intended for people recovering from illness, exhaustion, or prolonged hardship. The ingredients are selected carefully. Young lamb bones are placed into cool water. Leeks and onions contribute sweetness. Garlic adds warmth and depth. Fresh herbs provide aroma and subtle flavor. Everything is chosen with simplicity in mind. The fire remains low. Nothing is rushed. Steam slowly rises into the evening air. Hours pass quietly as the ingredients surrender their flavors to the liquid. Inside the home, family members move about their tasks. Children finish chores. Elders rest nearby. Conversations drift between rooms. The aroma from the simmering pot fills every corner of the house. It becomes part of the atmosphere itself, creating a sense of comfort before anyone has even taken a sip. When the broth is finally ready, its appearance is modest. There is no dramatic presentation. No extravagant garnish. No attempt to impress. Yet beneath its simplicity lies remarkable value. The liquid is rich without being heavy, warm without being overwhelming, nourishing without demanding effort from the body. For someone recovering from illness, this matters greatly. During periods of weakness, appetite often disappears. Heavy meals can feel overwhelming. Digestion becomes more difficult. In such moments, gentle nourishment becomes especially important. A warm broth offers hydration, comfort, and sustenance in a form that requires little effort to consume. Ancient families understood this through observation long before modern medicine explained the reasons. Imagine an elderly man sitting beside a window after weeks of illness. Strength has not fully returned. Even simple activities require energy. A family member brings him a steaming bowl of broth prepared earlier in the day. He wraps both hands around the bowl, feeling its warmth before taking the first sip. The flavor is subtle but satisfying. The warmth spreads through his chest. For the first time in days, eating feels easy. Moments like this occurred countless times across biblical history. A mother caring for a sick child. A wife helping her husband recover after a difficult journey. Children supporting aging parents. Neighbors bringing food to those unable to prepare it themselves. These acts of care formed the foundation of community life. Food became one of the most practical expressions of compassion available. Modern society often associates healing with sophisticated technology and specialized treatments. While these advances have brought tremendous benefits, ancient traditions remind us that recovery also involves basic human needs. Rest matters. Hydration matters. Nourishment matters. Emotional support matters. Small acts of kindness can influence well-being more than we sometimes realize. The restorative broths of Elisha's world reflected this understanding. They were not miracle cures. They were thoughtful responses to human vulnerability. They acknowledged weakness without judgment. They provided support during difficult seasons. Most importantly, they reminded people that recovery was possible. The preparation process itself carried meaning. Creating broth required patience and attention. Someone had to gather ingredients. Someone had to maintain the fire. Someone had to wait while time performed its quiet work. The final meal represented care invested over many hours. This lesson extends beyond food. Many forms of restoration require patience. Trust rebuilds gradually. Strength returns gradually. Confidence grows gradually. Just as broth develops 1 hour at a time, healing often unfolds through small improvements that accumulate over days, weeks, and months. Ancient families understood this because they witnessed it repeatedly. They observed how consistent care produced results. They recognized that meaningful change rarely happened overnight. Instead, progress emerged through steady effort and persistence. As darkness settles across the hills and the final bowls are served, the household grows quieter. The fire burns lower. Conversations soften. People who began the day tired and discouraged now feel a little stronger, a little warmer, a little more hopeful. Nothing dramatic has occurred. No spectacle. No grand announcement. Only a simple meal prepared with care. Yet sometimes the most important transformations begin exactly that way. The world of Elisha reminds us that restoration does not always arrive through extraordinary events. Often it appears in ordinary moments. A shared meal, a helping hand, a patient act of service, a warm bowl offered to someone who needs encouragement. And as we continue our journey through the foods and traditions of the biblical world, we leave the hills of ancient Israel and travel toward a place where water shaped daily life, where fishermen spent long nights beneath the stars, and where one The most memorable breakfasts in Scripture would forever connect nourishment, companionship, and faith. There, beside the waters of Galilee, another remarkable story is waiting to unfold. The Sea of Galilee looked different at dawn than it did at any other hour of the day. Before sunrise, the water often appeared like polished glass stretching beneath a sky painted in shades of blue and silver. The air carried a cool freshness that would disappear once the sun climbed higher. Along the shoreline, fishermen prepared their boats, checked their nets, and readied themselves for another day of work. This rhythm had existed for generations. Fathers taught sons. Brothers worked side by side. Entire communities depended upon the lake for food, trade, and survival. Life around the Sea of Galilee was not easy. Fishing demanded patience, endurance, and resilience. Men often spent entire nights on the water battling shifting weather, tangled nets, and uncertain catches. Some nights were productive, others brought disappointment. Yet regardless of the outcome, the fishermen returned to shore each morning carrying the physical exhaustion that came from hours of labor. Imagine one of those mornings nearly 2,000 years ago. The first light of day spreads across the horizon. Small boats move toward land after a long night on the water. The men aboard are tired. Their hands are rough from handling ropes and nets. Their clothing carries the scent of the lake. Every movement reflects fatigue accumulated through countless hours of work. As they step onto the shore, something familiar awaits them. A fire burns quietly near the water's edge. Beside it rests a cooking pot, the aroma rising from the steam instantly captures attention. Fish broth. For the people of Galilee, fish broth was more than a meal. It was one of the simplest and most practical ways to transform the day's catch into nourishment. Unlike larger animals whose bones required many hours of simmering, fish released flavor and nutrients relatively quickly. Heads, backbones, and smaller pieces that might otherwise be discarded became the foundation of a remarkably satisfying broth. The preparation began with water drawn fresh and clean. Fish bones were added carefully. Onion, garlic, and local herbs followed. The fire remained gentle. Within a relatively short time, the liquid transformed into something rich with flavor and warmth. The result was light enough to enjoy after a long night of work, yet nourishing enough to restore energy for the day ahead. Picture a fisherman lifting a steaming bowl after returning from the lake. His body aches from repetitive motion. His muscles are tired. Sleep still feels distant. Yet as he drinks the warm broth, something changes. The cold of the night begins to fade. Tension eases. Hunger softens. The simple meal provides exactly what he needs. This scene likely unfolded thousands of times across generations of fishing families. The people who lived along the shores of Galilee understood how to make the most of available resources. Every fish mattered. Every ingredient served a purpose. Waste was avoided whenever possible. Practical wisdom shaped daily habits, and broth represented one of the most effective examples of that philosophy. What makes Galilee particularly significant, however, is its connection to the life of Jesus. Several of his closest disciples were fishermen from this region. Peter, Andrew, James, and John all knew the demands of life on the water. They understood early mornings, physical labor, uncertain outcomes, and the value of a warm meal